for out of my classes, or maybe they just haven't watched it long enough to notice that. So we'll keep an eye on that. But once I set up OBS, I usually don't touch the settings, so it's not usually.
It could be from my. It could either be from my device or my devices combined. But
Well,
it's also on multiple
we'll
devices.
keep an eye on it.
Okay.
Yep. But thank you for letting me know. All right, so we'll go ahead and work on this one. So for question number one, the array has a size of 5. There are 5 elements in the array. So in the test, what you need to do is the usual stuff. I can use the smaller one. So we got comments on one column. We got line number on another column. And then we have all the variables involved. Now, because this question does not make use of any subroutines, so there are no local variables, no parameters whatsoever. Every single name that you see is a global variable. So they all have to be allocated before the program runs. So we have I in this case as a global variable. A as an array is also a global variable, but I'm gonna work with A, a little bit differently, because A has got 5 elements. So we have element 0, element 1, element 2, element 3, and element 4. So there are 5 elements to A. And then most people forget that there is one extra variable called T, and it's okay. I mean, it doesn't matter where you put all of these columns. As long as I can find them, it's going to be okay. Okay, so there's no specific order that I need for these columns, except for the relative positioning of the 5 elements of A. I don't think anyone is going to put the elements of A in some random order. I think most people just went from 0 to 4, right? But all the other variables do not matter. Okay, so I is going to be starting with an unknown value, and according to the question, okay, so according to the question, we want the third digit from the left of your student ID to be in A bracket 0, which is over here. So in my particular ID, it's going to be 0, 6, 8, 8, 7. Okay, so all of these are individual columns. There we go. And T would also start with an unknown value. This is the precondition of the entire algorithm. So now we can go ahead and get started with tracing the algorithm. All right, so I start with a value of 0, and that's on line 32. On line 33, we have a condition to evaluate. So we have I times 2 is less than bar A bar. So it is either true or false because it's a condition. So in this case, I is 0. 0 times 2 is still 0. Bar A bar is a question about notation. So what does it mean when I ask what is bar A bar? It would be 5 because it's the number of elements in the array. So bar A bar is 5. 0 is less than 5 is true. Okay, so we go into the loop until line 34, and this is where it gets a little bit tight in terms of the use of space here. So if it is this greater than A bracket bar A bar minus I minus 1 close bracket. Okay, so is that true or false? So now the question is, what is it really asking? We'll do it step by step. A bracket I is easy, right? Because I has a value of 0 at this point. So A bracket I is referring to A bracket 1, which has a value of 0 in my case. We good? Okay. What is it comparing against? It's compared against A bracket. Okay? We can see the open square bracket here and the closed square bracket over here. So whatever is in between the square bracket is an expression that gives you a value that will serve as an index. So now what you need to do is to find out the value of the expression that is between the square brackets. Okay? So we have bar A bar, which is always 5. 5 minus 1 is 4. 4 minus 0, because I is 0 at this point, is 4. So we are comparing A bracket 0 against A bracket 4. 4. A bracket 4 has a value of 7. So we are really asking, is 0 greater than 7? The answer is no. Okay? So we say it is false. So that means, if there is a false branch, we go to the branch corresponding to the else. But since there's no else branch in this case, that means we are done with the conditional statement. Okay? So the concept of a conditional statement that has no else branch was introduced really early on in this semester when we first talked about conditional statements. So there's nothing to do, when the condition is false. So that means we continue execution on line 39, which is just incrementing I by 1. I goes from 0 to 1. Is that okay? Then we go back to the beginning of the loop, okay? Because that's why this is a loop. So we go back to line 33, and then we ask I times 2 is less than bar A bar. It is still true because I is 1 at this point. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 is less than 5 is true. Then we go to line 34 again. So we ask again, A bracket I is greater than A bracket bar A bar minus I minus 1. Well, okay, it's the same. It's, even though it's not exactly the same as the expression, I just put out the I and 1, but it gives you the same result. So this time we're comparing A bracket I is 1 at this point. And this is 5. 5 minus 1 is 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. So comparing A bracket 1 against A bracket 3 this time. We're asking, is 6 greater than 8? The answer is no. Okay, it is false. So I'm kind of lucky because, it's also false. Then we go straight to line 39. We add 1 to I. We go back to line 33 again. So this time I is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 is less than 5 is true one last time. Then we go to line 34. We ask now, is A bracket I greater than A bracket RA bar, I'm going to follow the actual text this time, minus 1 minus I? The answer is false. Because in this case, I is 3, right? So when I is 3, it is referring to the value of 8. I is 2, sorry. So I is 2, we refer to A bracket I is A bracket 2 with 8. And you compute the expression that is inside the square bracket. 5 minus 4 minus 2 is also 2. So we're comparing A bracket 2 against A bracket 2. I even looked up to find this value cannot be correct. The answer has to be false in this case. It's false again. So that means when I trade 34 to line 39, because there's nothing to do in the conditional statement, I add 1 to it's going to be t at all. Back on 33. This time I is 6. 6 less than 5 is the end of the trade. Right. So sequence in between line 35 and line 37 is the value exchange in a sequence. So that means that when this sequence is done, the value of A bracket I would have been exchanged with the value of A bracket bar A bar minus 1 minus I. Uh-huh. Say that one more time. Variable. Yes. Well, okay, so when you do go through line 35 to line 37, then the values in these columns corresponding to the elements of A would be updated. Each item, like A bracket I, A bracket 0, A bracket 1, A bracket 2, those are individual variables. So you can use each one as if it is just a variable.
Like T, yeah?
Like T, yeah. It's just the way you refer to it is different. Instead of saying, "Oh, I want that brown coffee mug over there," you're saying, "I want coffee mug 3 inside that box over there." But it's still a coffee mug. You can still put coffee in it.
I was confused with line 36 and 37.
Mm,
Update AI when you get there.
sorry.
Where you can update AI. For example, if you get
You update I itself only on line 39, but when you're on line 36, you update A bracket I, which is one of the columns corresponding to array A.
It's gonna be a mess.
Well, we have an example like that in the notes, of how to initialize, an array. So that shows, you can treat an element in an array by itself just like any other variables.
so you pretty much just got lucky numbers to not have to go into
I just so happen to get some lucky numbers, yes. But even if you have to go through line 35 to line 37, you have to get through that code only up to twice. Yeah, because the third iteration is always comparing an element to itself, which means it's always going to be false. So that means the longest trace will only extend by 6 lines past what I have, which is not too terrible. Yep.
So what's the point of this pseudocode? Because at first I thought it was trying to sort, but it doesn't go past
It does not actually sort. There's no actual particular purpose of this. It's just that if you compare the first against the last, the second against the second last, and then the middle one is against itself, and then if the first is greater than the last, then it will exchange your places. But other than that, it doesn't really do anything specific. Okay. Any other questions about this one? So what I'm really testing, with this question are a few things. The first one, are things that you already should understand, because of the first exam. So that would be, the structure of the code itself. What is a loop? What is a conditional statement? But more importantly, I'm also testing whether you understand what is array indexing. Particularly, if I have a longer expression inside a square bracket, do you know how to deal with it? So those are the things that are being tested in this particular question. Are we good with number 1? Any questions about number 1? Yes?
So for line 39, I believe on one of the iterations where
Mm-hmm.
we're going through the loop,
Uh-huh.
I did what it said on its own line, but I forgot to write that line number.
Well, as long as it is clear that it is, as long as it's at the right place of the trace, I'm not gonna, if it's just missing one line number, I'm not gonna fuss about it. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Let's move on to question number 2. So here's question number 2. Question number 2 is not recursive, okay? It is not recursive because the subroutine, which is MA, does not call itself. There's no invoke MA from inside the definition of MA itself. So it is not recursive. But when you look at line 43, it looks like it is nested. So you are correct if you say it is nested. An invocation of a subroutine is nested within the invocation of another, well, the same subroutine but a different invocation. Okay? So the focus of this entire program in question number 2 really is mostly on line 43. It's like, how do we deal with line 43? Okay? So we'll go ahead and trace this, and I will open a new page. Okay, new page after, and now we'll go ahead and trace this one. This one is going to take up a little bit more space. So we'll have comments. Well, we don't need comments. There are no conditions to evaluate. So we're going to have line number, okay? And part of the text of the question, says, hint, you may need to leave plenty of width for the line number column because you have to copy the whole thing over, except for the call that you're dealing with. So I'm going to leave plenty of space for line number. So line number is going to be using up this much space. Okay, I think that's enough. There are no global variables. Okay, the way we know there are no global variables is we analyze the name of the things that we make use of in this code. So in the subroutine MA, which also stands for multiply and add, okay? So multiply and add is a subroutine. We can see that we refer to the names P, X, C, but they're all parameters. P is a parameter, X is a parameter, and C is a parameter. So none of these three is a global variable. We look into the main subroutine. We have only one name that is being used, which is N. N is a local variable. So we do not have any name that is unaccounted for, as a parameter or as a local variable. And as a result, there are no global variables. So if there are no global variables, the precondition is exceedingly easy to deal with. We just say, there's nothing to say. There are no variables to talk about in the precondition. Then we go to line 45. Line 45 is invoking main. Okay, main has one local variable, so we need to reserve one column for return line number, and another one for the local variable n. Local variable n always start with an unknown value, which is represented by a question mark, and the return line number is post because the invoking line is on line 45, and there are no lines after that. So that's why we use post to indicate, where do we go back to when the subroutine, when the invocation is done. Then we proceed to the first line of main that does something useful, which is line 42. Line 42 says n gets 7. Okay, there we go. And then line 43, which is kind of the mystery line of this entire program, is going to have, we now have to say, what are we going to do on line 43? So when you look at line 43, the last thing we want to do on line 43 is because of the left arrow, which means it's an assignment statement. We want to update a local variable n as the last thing that we want to do on line 43. But I cannot do that because I don't know what is the value on the right-hand side. So now we have to focus on, okay, so what is the value on the right-hand side? The value on the right-hand side is a little bit long, but it's not complex. It is a little bit long because it consists from here all the way up to here. That's the entire right-hand side. But it involves, calling, invoking MA as a subroutine, and whatever value MA returns is what I want to use to update variable n. What do you need to invoke MA? You need to supply every single one of its parameters, right? So when you look at the outer invoke, okay, we need to specify parameter P, parameter X, and also parameter C for the outer invoke. But then you go like, but wait, we cannot do that yet because the value that we want to specify for C, easy. That's a constant of 5, not a problem. The value we want to specify for X is pretty easy too because it's just referring to local variable n, which has a value of 7 at this point. So those two are not the problem. The problem is, what about parameter P from the perspective of the outer invoke? It's the result of invoking MA with, its own invocation. So that would be the first thing we need to take care of, is the inner invoke, okay? What is the value of the inner invoke? Then we know what to use to specify parameter P of the outer invoke, right? Okay? I hope you remember that we can only have one question mark in the return info cell. That is the restriction. It's like, okay, so there are two invokes here, but we can only deal with one invoke at a time. Which one would you invoke first? Which one are you going to take care of first? The outer one or the inner one? You can only do the inner one, okay? So we're going to take care of the inner invoke first. So if you take care of the inner invoke on line 43, then you need to allocate a column for return info. So the idea of the return info cell is it will tell you what else you need to do when this invocation is done, okay? And we are taking care of the inner invocation. So that means when this is all done, okay, when we come back, we still have to go back to line 43. And on line 43, the assignment is not done yet. When we come back, in fact, the outer invoke is not done yet either. Okay, so we have invoke MA. The inner invocation is the one that we are dealing with. So that is the invocation that is replaced with a question mark. The question mark is a placeholder of the return value of that invocation that we are dealing with. So that unknown is going to specify P, N is going to specify X, and then 5, in this case, is going to specify C. That is how this return info should look like, okay? Now, you obviously also have to specify the other stuff too, and I'm out of space, just like most of you do. So you can attach a separate sheet of paper to this side to extend and go like, okay, you know, the other columns would look like that, okay? So what would the other columns look like? So I'm going to open a new page too. So this is going to look a little bit, well, let me think. I can do it this way. So let me do it in this way, kind of like what you would do with a separate sheet of paper. So I'm going to do it in the same method that you would do. Okay. Okay, well, I have to move this over here because otherwise I don't get enough screen space to do this. All right. So we line up everything like this. All right. That's kind of what you guys had to do too. Okay, so when you invoke a subroutine that has a return value, you have to set up the return info cell, but you also have to remember to set up for the parameters. There are 3 parameters to set up. The 3 parameters in this particular question are named P, X, and C. So each one will get its own column, like so. And there we go. I have to keep an eye on whether things are still on screen or not. Okay, so what is P going to be? So let's double check. Okay, so we'll double check the question itself. So 1 is going to P. Okay, so yeah, this is going to look a little bit confusing. So we have a 1 going here. And then what else? We have N going to X. N has a value of 7 in this case. So 7 is here. And what about C? Just 3. Okay? All right. So given these are the parameters that we pass to the subroutine MA, or multiply and add, we just have to figure it out. I mean, there's only one line in the subroutine that does anything that is useful, which is line 38. So line 38 says, okay, take the value of P, that's 1. Take the value of X, it is 7. Multiply those two. It is 7. 7 plus 3 is 10. So we are returning a value of 10 when we execute line 38. Is that okay? So once we know what to do, we're just returning a value of 10. Then we say the next line we execute is on line 10. We're returning a value of 10. What do we do when we return a particular value in pseudocode? We look up the rightmost in use return info cell, copy and paste it, change the question mark to the value, which is 10 in this case, and we're done. Okay? So I know it's a lot of stuff to write, so you basically copy this cell, line 43, and gets invoke MA. The only change is this now becomes 10, and goes to X, 5 goes to C, and that's it. That's all line 10 needs to do. Then we get to line 11. Line 11 is the end of the subroutine. So that is when we need to know, we're at the end of one particular subroutine. Where am I supposed to go back to, and what else do I need to do when I get back onto that line? So that is when you need to look at the return info cell. And technically, we copy the entire return info cell over to the next line number. And then we have to deallocate all of the columns. So I'll go ahead and deallocate the columns first. Okay, so return info done, X done, P done, C is done. And then over here, okay, some people, have the great idea of, just drawing an arrow like that to basically say, copy and paste it over here. But I'm just going to copy the whole thing. So N is going to get invoke MA. Might as well do it the right way. MA 10 specifies P, N specifies X, and then we have 5 to specify C. Okay? Are we good so far? So that's line 11. Line 11 is now done. We now proceed to line 43. So line 43 does not look like the original line 43 anymore. Now it looks like this. Yes?
Where did line 10 and 11 come from?
Line 10 and 11,
It's not in the code, yeah.
they are in the subroutine.
In line 38.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. So that means I need to change these two. And let me double check. Their line,
38, 39.
38, 39. Okay, thank you. So line 38, 39. Thank you. All right. So line 43 says, okay, we have an assignment operation, but can I do the assignment operation right now? Can I update? Do I know what value I need to update local variable n at this point? Nope, because the right-hand side is another invocation. So, well, if it's an invocation that returns a value, we have to go through the invocation to find out what value it resolves to. So that means we have another invocation. Okay? So now we have to reallocate this column for return info. Oops. Return info. And there we go. And then we have to reallocate this column for P, this column for X, and this column for C. But this time, things are relatively easy to take care of, because when we're done, we go back to line 43. But this time, when we get back to line 43, we should have exactly the correct value on the right-hand side to assign to n. And also, we know what to pass to P. P should be passed a value of 10. We're still using n to specify x, and n at this point is still 7. We have not updated n yet. So n is still 7, which means x as a parameter is getting that value from n, which is 7. C is 5, okay, and that's coming straight from this 5 over here. And now we continue execution on line 38. So line 38 is going to do the same thing. It's going to calculate P times X plus C. So in this case, P is 10. 10 times 7 is 70. 70 plus 5 is 75. So we're going to return a value of 75. So returning a value of 75 means we look up the rightmost in-use column that is labeled return info, copy and paste everything except for the question mark, replace the question mark with the actual value that we're returning, which in this case is 75. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. So we say 43, line 43 is now n getting the value of 75. but we are not doing anything to n at this point. Okay, this is not the right time to update n. I'm just figuring out what value I will be using to update n, but we are not updating n at this point. All right, so now we move on. Okay, scroll down here and also scroll down here a little bit. Okay, off by 1. Let's see, that would be right. Okay, so now we get to line 39. Line 39 is the end of the definition of the subroutine. So when execution reaches the end of the definition of a subroutine, we are ready to go back to whoever was invoking us. The only clue of where to go back to is return info. So we return info here says line 43 is where we need to go back to, and once we get back to that line, we only have this much left on that line. But since we are also at the end of a subroutine, that means everything that we allocated for this invocation, they all need to be deallocated. So we got pick p x c over here, so everything needs to be deallocated. Okay. Now, if you have one single long line, striking through the entire row, that works too. Okay, so it doesn't have to be exactly like this, but you have to somehow let me know that you're deallocating those particular columns. So we are done with line 39. Now we get on to line 43. Line 43 now is very simple. N gets 75. I think we can do the assignment at this point. We know what the value is on the right-hand side to update the left-hand side. So we now update n from 7 to 75. And that's the end of line 43. The rest are super duper easy because line 44 is the last line of main, the subroutine main, which means now we just need to get back to where we came from. So according to the return line number column, we need to go back to post. And once we make use of return line number, then both of those columns that we allocated for main they're useless at this point. So we deallocate both of those columns, and then we continue execution at post, and that's the end of this particular pseudocode execution. So do we have any questions about this trace? It's not super duper long, okay? It's a little bit wide, because we do have two invocations on the same line, and you can only resolve one invocation at a time. That is the key. So do we have any questions about number 2? No questions? We are good on this one? All right. So assuming we're okay with this one, we move on to question number 3. So question number 3 is this one over here. This is the only one that is recursive, okay? So this one is recursive because we invoke XYZ from inside the definition of XYZ. So this one is recursive. It is not really much more complicated compared to the examples that we have gone through. It is certainly not as complicated as Fibonacci, because Fibonacci has got 2 recursive invocations, and this one only has 1. Okay, so that makes it kind of not as complicated as Fibonacci. All right, so should we work on this one? Yes? Okay. So I'm going to do the same thing. On this one, we'll start a new sheet, new page after. And I have a strong suspicion that we'll need a new page on this one too. So we'll go ahead and start with both. And here's the code. So let me see. I'm trying to find a way so I can see the code and also work on the traces at the same time. Well, I suppose it's not too bad to... Is it okay to switch around a little bit? Yeah. Okay. So the first line to start execution would be the line that is the first line that is outside of the definition of any subroutine. So that means we are starting with line 80. Okay. You will find out that in C programming, the invoke main is implicit. So all you have to do is to start execution in main. Okay, so we're gonna have, I think this one has got conditions, so we need comments in this case, and then we have line number. I'm using the yellow vertical line, as a separator between comments and line number, and I'm gonna leave quite a bit of space for line number, but not as much as last time. So maybe this much is already sufficient. Okay, there we go. So the first thing we need to specify is what is the precondition. So once again, we have to analyze the code and find out, do we have any global variables to talk about? Well, we'll start with subroutine XYZ. It only refers to the name U, and U is a pass by value parameter, so it's not a global variable. Then we look into the subroutine main. It does refer to the name of N, but N is already known as a local variable. It is not a global variable. So this program also does not have any global variables. So the precondition is done. We have to invoke main. Main has a local variable N, and there are no further lines after line 80. So when we get back here, we execute line 80, and we write down the return line number to be post, and it has a local variable of N, and in this case starts with an unknown value. All local variables always start with an unknown value. So that is what line 80 is going to do. Okay, never mind. I put the headers into the wrong place, so let me fix that first. So return line number as a column header goes here, and then N goes here. We write down post and a question mark over here. There we go. So now we're done with line 80. Then we go to the first line of main. So the first line of main is on line 78. So line 78 ultimately is an assignment operation because we want to change N to whatever the right-hand side is. But we don't know what the right-hand side is because it is an invocation of the subroutine XYZ. So that is what we need to do first, is to invoke XYZ using 79 to specify parameter U, and so we'll go do that. Okay. So to do that, we need to allocate one column for return info, and that return info has to go back to that line, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky because I have a very bad short-term memory, so I have to go back and forth a lot because I cannot remember what is on that line. So we have line 78, N gets something. Okay, so line 78, N gets whatever the invocation is going to return. So that is what we use to represent the return info in this invocation. We good so far? So we got one more thing to do because the subroutine has a parameter, so we have to specify that parameter. If I remember correctly, we were using 79 to pass to that parameter, but I cannot remember the name of the parameter. It is U. Okay, so that's U over here. And this is all done when we execute set line 78 the first time. Is that okay? Actually, we put 78 here, not the other way. There we go. Okay. So are we good so far? Okay. All right. So now we get into the subroutine XYZ doesn't do much, okay, but it is more complicated than the other one. We check whether U is greater than 0 on line 70, okay? So here's line 70, okay? And we ask U is greater than 0 is, well, that's pretty clear. U has a value of 79. 79 is greater than 0 is true. So we now move on to line 71, which is the then branch of the conditional statement. So now we see something that is kind of longish, okay? We know what U is. So U mod 5 is easy to resolve. So I'm not worried about that, okay? But in order to perform the addition, I need to know what is to the right-hand side of the addition, which is the result of an invocation of XYZ. So now we have another invocation of XYZ to deal with. So might as well just try to figure out what we are passing this time. U is 79 in this case. What is 79 divided by 5? 20, no, 15 and something? 15 point something, right? Because 20 will make it 80, so it's 15, 15.8. So 15.8 is what is inside the floor function, and the floor is going to take 15 point something to just 15. Okay. So when we call xyz recursively, we're passing 15 to the new parameter u, and that is happening on line 71. Okay. All right. So when we get to line 71, we have to use return info because the invocation of xyz has its own return value, and this when we get back, we have to continue on line 71, and what is left on that line is there's still a return. We still have, okay, let me see what is there. U mod 5, okay. So we still have U mod 5 plus question mark, because the invocation that we're dealing with is the one that we are converting into a question mark. Yes?
Can we resolve U mod 5 before?
Yeah, you can. Yep. If you prefer, you can resolve what is U mod 5. So what is U mod 5? U is 79. So what is the remainder of 79 divided by 5? 4. Yep. So if you want to, you can change this to a 4 at this point. It is okay. It's not a problem. But I'm more focused on just the invocation of the subroutine itself. So I'm taking care of the invocation first. But because we are invoking the subroutine xyz, we still need to pass u again. And this time, we already figure out that the new value of u is supposed to be 15. So that is what we are doing with the with line 71. Yep.
I think U is like by reference.
It is not by reference. I do not believe so.
It's not, it's by value.
I think it's passed by value, but let me double check.
Number 4, that's by
Yeah.
It's question 4.
Yeah, question 4 is the only one that has a pass by reference. So this one is still passed by value. Okay, so this is correct up to this point. Okay, so now we get back into the first line of the subroutine xyz, which is on line 70. And we are evaluating u is greater than 0 again. And it is still true because u has a value of 15. 15 is greater than 0 is true. Okay, so that means we have to go to line 71 again. And when we get to line 71, we have to invoke again because line 71 has, it's in the form of return u mod 5 plus, and then the invocation of u divide the floor of u divided by 5. So it's going to be the same thing. So now we have to allocate 2 more columns for the third invocation of xyz. So we have return info here, and then we have u over here. Okay, I didn't leave enough space. My bad. So we have return info, okay, which is going back to line 71, and we still have the return to do, and then we have u mod 5 plus question mark. Okay, what is this new u this time? It is going to be the floor of u divided by 5. So it's going to be 3. Very good. Okay. And scroll. This is going to be the difficult part, is to make sure that the 2 windows here line up more or less. Okay. Did I mess up? Yep, I did. There we go. Come on, just a little bit. There we go. Okay. So now we're going to the beginning of the subroutine again, because this is another invocation of xyz. So we're going to start with line 70 again. U is, U is 3 this time. So U is greater than 0 is still true. Then we get to line 71. So I'm just extending the vertical lines as I need to. Okay. So when we get to line 71, we have to call the subroutine again. Okay, so we have to allocate another column for return info. And it has to say when we return to line 71, we still have return u mod 5 plus whatever the invocation is returning. And then this time when we invoke xyz, what is the floor of 3 divided by 5? 0. Okay? So this is the last invocation. All right, so when we get back to line 70, once again, I need to make sure that the rows are lined up. We ask whether u is greater than 0. This time it is false. Hmm? Say that one more time. Oh, you cannot. Okay. Okay, I can scroll this one through a little bit like this. Would that work? Is that okay? All right. So this is the last invocation. So when we use this particular u in the last invocation, then on line 70, when we ask whether u is greater than 0, then the answer is false. Okay, u is greater than 0 is false. So we have to go to the else branch because this time we do have an else branch. So we'll go look at what the else branch is trying to do. The else branch on line 73 says, just go ahead and return u. Okay. So that's pretty easy to do, except, to display all this stuff is a little bit harder. So on line 73, not 71, on line 73, we are returning 0. So what does it do when we say we want to return a value of 0? What do? We look up the rightmost in use column that is labeled return info, because we have a lot of return info columns. We have to be clear which one we want to use. This is the most recent one. So all we have to do is to copy everything and change the question mark to a 0. Okay. So that means I need to make sure that everything is still aligned correctly. I think they are. So we have to now say copy and paste, line 71, return u mod 5. And then this question mark is now replaced with a 0. And that's all that return statement is going to do. Okay. Is everything still lined up? Yep, it is. Okay. Okay. So after line 73 is done, we get out of the conditional statement. Let me go back to the code here. So after line 73, we get out of the conditional statement, and we'll get to line 75, which is the end of the subroutine. So now we say we get to line 75. What does line 75 have to do? It's got two things to do. It has to copy the entire return info cell into the line number column, and then it has to deallocate all the columns that we allocated for this invocation. Okay. All right, so this gets a little bit confusing because I have a lot of windows and a lot of scrolling to do. So now let's scroll up a little bit and scroll that up a little bit. You have to make sure that things are still aligned correctly. So I think this is aligned correctly because line 73 is the line that changes the question mark to a 0. So now we say on line 75, we copy the return info cell into the line column, which is line 71 says return u mod 5 plus 0 in this case. And now we can deallocate these two columns. So this column is a return info cell or return info column deallocated. This is u deallocated. Okay. So are we doing okay so far with line 75? So after line 75, we get back onto line 71. The only reason why we know that we have to go back to line 71 after line 75 is because we keep track of that using return info. Okay? So when we get back on line 71, we have to return u mod 5 plus 0. So I do the computation of u mod 5 at this point, but as you pointed out, you can do it before the invocation of the subroutine. So either way is fine, okay? There's no problem. But the question is, which column with a label of u are we talking about, okay? So to answer the question, let's go ahead and kind of line up everything first. Okay, there we go. So which column are we talking about? Which value should I use in order to compute u mod 5? It's going to be this column, okay? Because this is the rightmost column that is in use with a label of u, which currently has a value of 3. So now we can finally compute what is 3 mod 5. What do you think is 3 mod 5? It's just 3, because 3 mod 5 is the remainder of 3 divided by 5, which is just 3. So now we have 3 plus 0, which is 3. So that means line 71 can now actually finally do what it is supposed to do, returning a particular value of 3. So when we return a specific value, we have to look up the rightmost in-use return info cell, which is this one this time, copy and paste it, change the question mark to a 3. So that means when we execute line 71, this is what we do. We copy and paste the rightmost return info cell, copy and paste everything. Oops. U mod 5. And then only change the question mark to the value that we are returning, which turns out to be 3 this time, and we're done. Okay? Now we move on from line 71 to line 73, which is end define sub. So for that to work, we have to indicate what columns we are deallocating. So these 2 columns are now deallocated. Return info is deallocated, u is deallocated. But we also have to remember to write down the return info cell over here, which is return u mod 5 plus 3, because we are basically just copying this thing over here to here. Are we still doing okay? Okay, so we need to extend a bunch of lines here. Who was smart enough to bring a ruler? I know some of you did. Okay, good idea. I wish I was smart enough to do that. Because I'm extending vertical lines by hand at this point. Okay, all right. So now we can now put this back to where it is supposed to go, like that. Okay. So now we can execute this particular line 71. This line 71 has everything ready to go, because we know the right-hand side of the addition is 3, and this particular u is referring to what? What is the rightmost column that is still in use and labeled u? You can barely see it, but you know which one it is, right? So what value are we referring to? 15. Very good. What is 15 mod 5? No, it's 0. Yes, 15 mod 5 is the remainder of 15 divided by 5, which is 0. So we have 0 plus 3, right? Which is also 3, just 3. So now we execute return a value of 3 again. So this time we have to copy and paste the return info cell that is barely visible at this point, which is this one over here. So now we copy and paste it and say line 71 return u mod 5 plus 3. Okay, and then we get to line 73. Line 73 once again has to deallocate some columns. Okay, return info cell. Oops.
Line 75, that's in the fine zone.
Huh?
Is it line 75 or line 73 that's in the fine zone?
You're right. It's line 75. 73 is the else. Okay, so it's 75. So we have to cross out return info, cross out the u. Okay, so both of these columns are now deallocated.
There is two line of 75.
Huh? Say that one more time.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's okay? Okay. And then we have to copy and paste the return info cell over here, which is return u mod 5 plus 3. Okay. It's this one over here. We copy over here. So are we still doing okay? All right. Okay, so now we don't need the other trace window. We just need this one at this point. Because we are now ready to execute return u mod 5 plus 3. But this u is not in view anymore because it is kind of like this column but way on top. You won't have this problem on a piece of paper, but since I'm not working with a piece of paper, I do have that problem. It's 79, okay? So what is 79 mod 5? 79 divided by 5 has a remainder of 4. Has a remainder of 4, okay? So we have, 4 plus 3 this time. That's what we are returning. We are returning a value of 7, okay? So when you return a value of 7, you have to copy and paste the return info cell, okay? And this time it's going to be this one over here, okay? Now, interestingly, I can actually do that, okay? Let me show you what I mean by that, okay? You guys will hate it because I can do it. Because I can do this. Copy. And let's see, where's paste? Edit, paste. And I can drag it to over here. And then I can just erase this thing here and replace it with 7. I think all the keystrokes and mouse operations that I have to do is actually taking longer than copy and pasting. But I'm just showing you that, yes, I can do it. Okay, so that's all we do, okay? Copy and paste the return info cell, change the question mark to whatever value that we are returning. This time we are returning a value of 7. So we are done with line 71. So once again, we get to line 75, which is n-defined sub, okay? Yeah, there's a lot of potential copy and pasting, right? So when we get to line 75, we have to remember to deallocate return info. Okay, deallocate u. And then we can now, we also have to copy and paste the return info cell itself into the line number column. So we are supposed to go back to line 78. And when we do get back to line 78, n gets a value of 7. That is what line 75 is supposed to do. So after line 75, we look up the line number column. We say, oh, we are supposed to get back to line 78. We need to update n to 5. So now we look up, where's n? N is right here. So we update that particular column to 7. So we're done with line 78. Now we move on to line 79, which is n-defined sub for main. So that means we have to deallocate return line number, get rid of this, deallocate n, and put a post over here. And then when we continue execution at post, we are done. It takes a long time, and a lot of panning and moving around because I have a big piece of paper. But the concept is not that difficult. It's okay, I'm just going to change the battery. But do we have any questions about this question? How to track all the return info, how to execute return statements?
The final exam going to be the same like this?
The final exam is going to have record types, and we're going to have mixing and matching of local variables, passing by reference and passing by value. So we'll take a pass by value parameter and then pass it again by reference to something else and try to figure out what that's going to do. I will explain all that before the final exam. Okay? Yep.
So I have a question about that. I was trying to read ahead in the modules, and there aren't any that has those types.
That is correct. I have to either type something up, or we can just use the in-class demonstration. But I think I'll go ahead and type up. the mixing of the mixing and matching of the features that we have talked about so far. Okay, so that's number 3, and are we ready to move on to the last question, number 4? Yes. Okay. How much time do we have? Oh, we got 10 minutes. Plenty of time. Okay, so let's move on to the last question. All right, so here's the last question. What? Huh? Okay, we're ready? Okay. All right, so this is the last question. This is the only one that has passed by reference, but it is also, the passing by reference is right here and also here, okay? And we're using a local variable to pass by reference to, a parameter, okay? All right, so we'll go ahead and track this one down. This one, hopefully won't take as long. I don't think it's going to take nearly as long as the other one. In fact, I think we can work with just one Zerno window instead of 2. So we'll go ahead and insert a new page and drag it over here. Okay. And this one has no conditions to evaluate, so we don't need comments. We do have line number. And we're going to leave some space for line number because we got some longer lines to copy and paste. There are no global variables, so that means the precondition doesn't have to say much. Then we start execution on line 79. Line 79 is invoking main. Main itself does not return a value, so return line number is fine here. But when we do return, we're supposed to return to post because line 79 is the last line of the pseudocode. So that's that. It does have a local variable I, and because it is a local variable, it starts with an unknown value like that. Okay, but this one does require you to label the columns. Okay, the question itself says you need to label the columns. So we'll go ahead and So we'll go ahead and label the columns. This is column A, this is column B, column C. Okay. Then we continue execution on line 76, which is just changing I to 12. So 12 goes here. And now we move on to line 77. Say this is column D. So now the question is, what do we do when we get to line 77? So I'm going to show you the code first, and then we'll figure out what we need to do. So when we look at line 77, ultimately what we want to do is to compute some kind of right-hand side value, and then use that value to update the left-hand side, which is local variable I. But I don't know what value I'm supposed to use to update the local variable I, because I have an addition, and then both the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the addition are invocations. So this should resemble a little bit of the John and Ryan, example program, right? Except, the invocation itself is a little bit different, but in terms of, which one do we take care of first and how to represent it, it should be very similar to the other sample program that we looked at. So we're going to work from left to right in this case. So that means we're going to take care of this invocation first, and then we'll take care of the other invocation. Okay, so with that assumption, okay, then on line 77, we have to invoke PE. So we need to allocate one column for return info. Are we good? Okay. Well, I can hear it. If you guys can telepathically communicate without anyone else, being able to listen in to that channel, it would be great. What that we know of. Just because there's no evidence of something doesn't mean it does not exist, right? Okay, so we specify return info, and remember the purpose of return info is so that we can keep track of what else do we need to do on that line, okay? So the assignment is not done yet, The first invocation is done, but the second invocation is still there. So we still have to write down the entire second invocation, just the way it is. Question? Yep. Oh, you cannot see it.
No, I was just saying, for like space on the test, what if you like kind of shorthanded the right hand side, but still kept it all in there?
You can shorthand a little bit, like this side here,
INVK or whatever.
and then just dot dot dot.
Yeah.
If it is consistent with how you get back to it later on, it will be okay. Yeah. All right. So, but because we are calling PE, because of this invocation, we need two additional columns: one for U, which is passed by reference, and one for W, which is passed by value. In this case, so I'm pushing the columns a little bit. This is column D. So this is column E. And this is column F. Okay, so let's see if we can squeeze things in just enough for this. This is column U, which is passed by reference. The thing that I use to specify parameter U in this case is also I, because the other one also uses I. And I is living in column C. So this one is actually column C. It's a reference to column C. So now I'm trying to squeeze in something here, aka column C. I can barely do it. But this reads, aka, also known as column C. It is a reference to column C. So whether you say column C, reference to column C, also known as column C, they're all okay as long as you mention column C somewhere in this description. Column F is for W. So W is the name of the parameter. And what we pass to it is just 2. There we go. So this way now we are set up with all the columns. Then we continue execution in PE, which stands for plus equal. So we continue execution on line 71. So line 71 wants to compute the right-hand side first, which is really just the sum of U and W. W is easy. W has a value of 2. That's easy. But U doesn't have a value of its own, because it's a reference. It is a reference of column C. Column C itself has a value of 12 at this point. So we are really calculating what is 12 plus 2, which is 14. So the right-hand side of line 71 is 14, and then we use 14 to update U. So once again, we look at what U is. U itself does not have a place to store a value. It is a reference to another column. So it is the column that it is referencing that gets updated. So on line 71, column C is the one that gets updated to a value of 14, not column E in this case. So 14 goes here. Are we good with this part? This is probably the trickier part of this entire thing. Then we get to line 72. Okay, we're combining a return with passing by reference, but those two things are, in linear algebra, we call those, orthogonal, which means you can have one or the other or both. Okay, they do not interact, in any way. So we are returning the value of U, which means we are returning 14. Okay, so when we return, it is still exactly the same mechanism as usual. We copy and paste the return info cell, change the question mark to the value that we are returning. So that means line 77 is I gets 14 plus, okay, as one of you just suggested, I abbreviated this. Okay, but that's the idea. Okay, the most important part is you find the question mark and you just change that question mark to the value that we are returning. Okay, so that's line 72. And then we get to line 73, which means we deallocate a whole bunch of stuff here. Return info gets deallocated, U gets deallocated, W gets deallocated. But don't forget to copy and paste the return info cell which is how we know that we have to get back to line 77 afterwards. Okay. So this time I am going to be a little bit lengthy, writing down that we pass I to W again. So invoke PE, we use I to specify U, and then I again to specify W. Okay. All right. So this time when we get back onto line 77, so line 73 is doing the deallocation and copying and pasting of the return info cell to the line number column. But now we get back onto line 77. I still don't know what I'm supposed to use to update I, because the other side of the addition, the right-hand side, it's still an invocation itself. So we have to invoke again. Okay. So to invoke again, that means we reallocate this column for return info, but this time when we specify what to do after we get back onto line 77, it would just be 14 plus whatever this question mark is. We still have to allocate one column for U and one column for W. U is still AKA column C, and W this time is a little bit tricky because when you look at this invocation, I'm using I, its current value to specify W. So when you look up I, it is no longer 12, it is actually 14. So we are using 14 to specify W, so W now has 14. How many people use 12 instead of 14 in this case? Did anyone use 12? Because I would still consider that as a correct answer, because how it gets this done, it depends on whether you evaluate the right-hand side or the left-hand side first. And compilers can do one or the other, even though we normally just read from left to right. Yes?
What if you forgot to label the columns and accidentally said like AKA I?
Then I would, yeah, so the point is we don't want to refer to the name of a variable, but where it lives.
Yeah, I didn't get the whole column.
Yeah, so, I'm probably you'll get a minor deduction of points, but not a whole lot. Because it is a conceptual thing, because what passing by reference is doing is it's letting the subroutine to know where the variable is, but not the name of the variable. So it is an important concept to understand it is where that we are conveying. Okay, so we got all the columns set up, and now we continue execution in the subroutine on line 71. And this time we are updating column C with 14, let's see. So we are adding U and W. U is also known as column C, which currently has a value of 14. W also has a value of 14. So 14 plus 14 is 28. Column C is now updated to 28. On line 72, we are returning the value of 28 in this case. So that means we look up the rightmost return info cell, which is this one here, and change the question mark to 28. And then we get to line 73. We deallocate a whole bunch of stuff, which is the return info cell column. The column for U, the column for W, those are all deallocated. And then we copy and paste the return info cell over here, which is I gets 14 plus 28. Okay. Then we continue execution on line 77. And this time we can do it because 14 plus 28 is what? 72? 52? Right? Or did I mess up my math? Or is it 42? 42. Okay, there we go. So 42 is used to update I. So 42 goes here. And then after that, we go to line 78. We're almost done. We're pretty close. We deallocate the return line number column. We deallocate the column for I. And then we get back to post. And we're all done. So that is the entire test. So I was able to do all this with handwritten stuff.
And we're out of time.
Hmm? Oh, we're 5 minutes past? We're 2 minutes past. And I have to do all the scrolling in between too, so it is doable, just a little tight.